Good morning, everyone. I'm Venkat Ramakrishnan, co-founder and CEO of Focaloid Technologies. Firstly, thank you all for joining in. Uh, Quickly about Focaloid, we are a technology engineering company. We do a lot of work around AI, data, and cloud. We work with organizations that are building complex technology products. This could be AI-driven products or cloud-native applications or connected systems. And a lot of the work that we do typically involves helping organizations move from their MVPs or minimum viable products to launching it in a real-time, real-world scenario where it has to operate reliably at scale. Uh, and nowadays, we see a lot of autonomous, distributed, and event-driven systems coming along. And with that, we are seeing a series of new challenges. These challenges are both at an architectural level as well as at an operational level. And that's what really today's conversation is centered around. Joining me from Seattle is Marutha. Marutha is Focaloid's president and chief revenue officer. He's someone who is constantly in touch with our clients and has firsthand experience of what problems they are facing, both at a business as well as a technology level. Uh, Marutha, probably I would love to start with you. What maybe we could look at what are some of the shifts in conversations that you are seeing nowadays?
Thanks, Venkat. As you know that I'm engaging with clients to understand what they want to implement, and we are into discovery phase. One constant shift that I'm seeing off late, earlier the questions was going around asking, can we build autonomous system with very minimal human uh, in the loop? But that question is now shifting. The question is coming is, can these autonomous system coordinate, verify, and account for economic consequences? This is coming across not just in one industry, it's coming across various clients, various industries, and different types of organization. It's not a small gap. So I think today it's time that we look at it, how we are tackling this question.
This is very interesting, Marutha, because autonomous decisions are not necessarily new. And I'm talking about something like in AWS, where we have been using auto scaling feature. Depending on the load, we are scaling the infrastructure that's available to us. And those decisions have an economic consequence as well. Right? You're signing up for more infrastructure capacity. Uh, but I believe what's changing is that earlier, at least in the case of an AWS, it's happening in a very controlled environment. But today the scale, the granularity, and the independence of these actions has evolved, and that's what's probably changed. And I think this is a good point because this brings us to the guest that we have on our call today, because he's someone who is doing a lot of work in this area and building a company centered around this. Marutha, I would probably let you introduce him.
Yes, Venkat. And I'd like to take this opportunity to invite Ted Schwartz, founder of and CEO of Edge Microsystem, the company behind EMPIC. I leave Ted to explain what EMPIC is, but I just want to give a context. He had been spending quite a lot of his life, both on the economics, the financial system side, and also implementing distributed infrastructure. So he's bringing both the world together and building this EMPIC solution, which might be an answer for most of the problems that we are discussing today. Ted, welcome.
And that's right. Thank you very much, Marutha, and thank you, Venkat, for allowing me to join you in this discussion. It's an exciting one. So EMPIC was created with a vision of changing future, the future in which, as you mentioned, Venkat, we're seeing more and more autonomy in devices and IoT, M2M, SaaS systems, really exhibiting agentic behavior, implementing agentic behavior. And this was really brought about by some technological shifts. We saw blockchain emerging over the last decade, really AI really coming into its own just in the last decade. And of course, very recently, this explosive agentic technology that's now becoming prevalent. It's in that background that I founded Edge Micropayments, we've built the EMPIC platform It's the Edge micropayment platform for integrated commerce. What we think is that those technology changes I mentioned, they introduce opportunities. They also introduce problems and new risks and new difficulties in managing these systems that are now able to act. But those technologies also provide a source of the solution. So, as I mentioned, there are problems such as accountability gaps in between devices making these kinds of decisions. What you see today in the field is that teams are building very impressive systems, autonomous systems with months of development, but the question of payments usually comes too late in the process. Understanding the monetization of the process is not well thought out. And that's what we're here to do with EMPIC, is to provide infrastructure to address that problem. This was all fine before we had a period in which we were simply monitoring and reporting, right? But now, when machines are actively purchasing, triggering actions, creating financial commitments, then that new economic layer really becomes the weakest link. And that was because the humans were viewed as the central focus of these payment systems. So humans in the loop. But today, autonomous systems have destroyed that assumption, and now we're seeing high frequency decisions being made by machines with economic weight and no human in the loop. So again, that's what EMPIC's built for. And we're not a payment product as such, but we're more of a economic coordination infrastructure that includes the payment aspect as part of the entire solution.
Thank you, Ted, and welcome once again to today's discussion. Economic coordination infrastructure, I think that's an interesting terminology. For the sake of, I think, both us as well as the audience, can you probably walk us through a couple of practical use cases or real-life use cases on how or what EMPIC does that is not available or possible using today's infrastructure or maybe today's payment systems?
Right, sure. And so I think, a good example would be an agentic system which routes shipments in real time, making decisions at every step. And these kinds of decisions are based on requirements to make carrier calls, perform queries with costs associated, pay for route reservation fees for vehicles engaged in the routing and the shipments, perhaps paying for fuel surcharges. All of those things have to be priced, authorized, and settled at the time that those decisions are being finalized, concurrent with the actual actions. And that's a challenge given the backdrop of the traditional systems for payment and settlement. We're talking about charging for packets of data. That's what EMPIC enables, charging per decision. But really, again, it's the coordination of all of these economic events, being able to price in real time, to authorize agentic agreements that were put into place in contractual relationships between parties that are sharing data between each other, and ultimately automatically settling those payments. That we can use different features of payment infrastructure for that: blockchain, fiat currency, or central bank digital currencies as the final step in that process.
Got it. I think this hits closer to home than I imagined, because we currently are helping build a fleet monitoring platform for a client of ours. Imagine you have telemetry involved, you have AI-enabled cameras, you're looking at both operational monitoring as well as probably maintenance alert and stuff like that. A traditional build-out would have looked at maybe just making data available. How do we gather insights from this data? And more importantly, talk about maybe security, scalability, and reliability. But I think what I understand from you is that the moment we talk about these systems becoming more independent, talking dynamically with external service providers to probably buy packets or take economic decisions, then I think the whole ecosystem or the picture changes, and that's where probably it's not just processing information, but it's taking decisions that have economic consequence. And that's where probably we need to bring in governance and have systems and frameworks in place. Have I got that right?
That's right. I think so. I think that governance that you mentioned, that in my another term would be the coordination of the governing decisions while decisions are actually in flight. We need to be able to manage what's being committed, under what conditions, what prices are assigned to these incremental values that are being transacted upon, and ultimately where the accountability lies. So yes, I think you hit it right on the head with that description.
This is also, this is also enabling micropayments at some level, right? And that in turn has the potential to change the economic models around it as well. Instead of a subscriber or a subscription or a SaaS model, it has potential to transform that into a granular pay-as-you-go model. Do you see that happening as well?
Yeah. In fact, that identification of granularity is something that has been a problem in the past for making machine payments viable, because as you can imagine, machines are transacting at very high frequency, very high volumes of data, but the traditional systems that were in place for settling those kinds of transactions were, again, human scoped, human scaled, and with long periods of duration, as well as coarse granularity. With micropayments, we can price and settle each small event, such as an AI inference or an API call, and it provides a means to process millions of transactions in a minute, if you have a system that needs to have that performed, something that would not be able to have been done previously with the existing payment systems.
Got it. And I think that what's becoming very clear is that the existing infrastructure is probably not built for this. But if I were to ask you to pick probably what are the top areas or what are the top three points where the system is breaking, what would you say?
Right. So, I think the first thing I would point to is latency within the systems. Again, the expected cadence of a settlement process in traditional rails is one that takes days, perhaps weeks, to settle. And so that prevents the kinds of interdependent decision-making processes that we see in agentic systems from being economically viable. We discussed granularity. Another area to be cautious about is accountability, being able to ascribe to the devices in the network systems responsibilities for each step towards reaching the ultimate goals of the system.
Got it. Okay, so latency, granularity, and accountability. These are probably the three areas where you're seeing infrastructure breakdown. And this is talking from our experience. I think latency is probably the most common or the most evident one, because even when we are building agentic orchestration systems involving agentic orchestration, we are coming across latency as a problem, because the moment you introduce more approvals or synchronous approvals or external checks, you're slowing the system down. So that's probably most evident. But you spoke about accountability. That's the piece that I believe comes or surfaces towards the end or shows up last, right? But I believe that has the largest impact, because when somebody turns up and asks, hey, why did the system behave this way and not some other way? And if that question is coming way down the journey, then you're talking about having to go back and rebuild the system, not just look up a log and find answer, but to correct the system, you have to probably re-architect or re-engineer, which makes it very expensive.
That's right. And that's why we think of the economic accountability as something that requires the ability to reconstruct what happened at each step along the process chain, who or what authorized each step, what the intended limits were in terms of spending. All of that has to be captured in such a way that we can ascribe responsibilities ultimately to each agent within the system. So in the event that there is a failure, we can easily trace to the point that occurred and understand how we need to correct in the future.
Yeah, that brings some of my experience with the clients. Clients were asking, can we build autonomous system without any human approval? Now it is coming to, if we are implementing autonomous system without human approval, is it correctly doing it? Is it authorized to do it? What we owe, and what is the ownership level, correct? And the other important thing is, some of these teams have built the autonomous system already. Infrastructure is not built with keeping this economic layer in mind. It was more data-centric autonomous system. It is not paid through to go to a granular level to enable monetization. So question to you, Ted, is if such team is approaching us and looking at to build in this accountability in the economic transaction, is it a re-architecture requirement, or can we salvage it at this stage?
Yeah, no, it's salvageable. Importantly, it depends upon the separation between the concerns of agentic logic and transaction logic already built into those systems. That's where things can get expensive. If there is tightly woven agentic and transactional logic in one location, it becomes hard to disentangle those and manage them appropriately. So when they're separated, then we think that it's an easier opportunity to introduce this usage-based kind of economic event coordination that we're talking about. When that is not the case, when there are problems, one of our solutions is to look at introducing coordination interfaces at the seams between these devices that are operating to centralize some of the transactional logic and coordinate for better outcomes that we can migrate to incrementally or by focusing on the high value areas first.
Thank you, Ted. I think I want to push this a little further, Ted. I think you've spoken about what's broken with the current infrastructure or the current systems that are available, but let me also approach it on a different lens. Today, I'm sitting here, I want to build something that's going to be autonomous, that should be designed for scale and should take care of this concern. How would I go about architecting it? What are things that I should think about early on so that I don't have to think about the retrofitting aspect or worry about salvaging things later on? How would you go about it?
Right. Well, if you have the luxury of being able to do this, then I would recommend is you think about three primitives in your architecture that are fundamentally important. Economic identity would be the first. Authorization boundaries would be the second, and coordination endpoints, as I mentioned, are really vitally important. So I only talk a little bit about each one of those. With identity, what we need is a system where we have a verifiable, auditable ID, not something which is simply a label for a device in the system, but rather something that's cryptographically anchored. It survives audits and disputes, and becomes the key by which we can determine that accountability question. We also need predefined policies that define what agents can commit to, what requires escalation to other agents or to humans, if need be, to implement the spending policies, by the way, which those spending policies must be actually embedded within the agent's runtime or the gateway interface proxying for those devices or agents. And so once we have boundaries on liability, then we can feel more comfortable that we have an auditable behavior that will allow us once again to trace the problems when they occur.
Okay, I think this sort of maps well with, I think, how architects already think about systems, because the immutable identity that you spoke about is very similar, or let's say something that I can map to the identity and access management systems that we would implement. The policies that you speak about are maybe like the guardrails and things that we set up around every agent that we build. And the last layer, the economic coordination layer, is probably the observability and monitoring and overall a governance layer that comes in. And in fact, what I understand from my architects is that we are already operationalizing it in one way, which is whenever we are building agentic systems, the identity that you spoke about, as well as the boundaries, right? The guardrails. This is something that's being built into the agent specification or the agent definition that we prepare. So it's not limited to just what an agent should do, but it's also talking about not just the behavior, but things like what are the boundaries, what are the commitments that it can do, where it should not step into, where should it seek for probably validation or approvals. I think those are being built into it.
That's
Makes
right.
sense. Venkat. The other challenge that I'm getting from the client is if somebody has implemented a system, it's gone past the greenfield stage and already production, and it's very obvious they cannot re-architecture, redesign. So then what would you suggest they should do first before taking a decision of bringing in a proper accountable system in place?
Sure. I think the very first step is to step back and perform an accountability audit of the system so that you understand where the autonomous actions are occurring that have the potential for creating economic commitments. And this can be implemented as an observability layer initially, allowing for the instrumentation of device behaviors, recording the decisions that are being made, understanding the economic actions, and that eventually can evolve into full coordination layer in which the observation becomes more of a foundation for active governance in these systems with enforcement of policies and service level agreements as part of the decision loop.
Okay, I think this is adding into the whole thing, and the way we have approached this is that whenever we have had the initial discovery or scoping discussions, right, which happens at the start of any project, we're probably asking a different set of questions right now, in addition to what we earlier used to ask. Before jumping into the actual building, I think questions today surround what are the actions that are autonomously happening, what are the downstream sequence of events that happen, and what are the consequences, and where do you have visibility, where do you don't have visibility, because I think, like you said, understanding the lay of the land is more important to deciding what we build from there.
Got it. So one other thing, if I can bring in Focaloid's IoT practice, a lot of the clients have deployed tens and thousands of devices in the field, and we know that it's very difficult to upgrade. It's firmware upgrade and it's done over the period. So if you want to bring in economic accountability into the system, where the edge devices cannot be actually modified, what is the best way to recommend the clients to go about doing it?
Right. So, the coordination does not have to occur within the device itself, but what we can recommend is a gateway architecture in which this economic coordination process runs on an edge layer, proxying on behalf of the devices that it's working with. And of course, you'll need each device, as I mentioned, having the economic identity and the policies around it, as either within the devices, if you can have it that way, or just simply managing everything centrally in this gateway. That's what I think of when I hear what you're describing, the essentially a brownfield remediation project. I think what you have to work with what you have, and it's sometimes the easiest approach is to introduce this new component that acts on behalf of the existing devices that are more difficult to manage.
Yeah. So if I can move to, we talked about doing micropayments at mission speed, correct? And today, for teams which is building IoT and AI-based systems, this becomes an important thing. And with programmable money and other options that we have to do settlement, and how do you look at this entire scenario is going to change with maybe stablecoin as an option? What do you think?
Yeah, I think stablecoin is an option. As we discussed, it allows for very low-cost, high-speed transactions to be processed, to be settled in ways that weren't previously possible. That impacts not only the billing, but again, it reveals the opportunities for some a new way to look at the business models themselves. Perhaps identify activities that were formerly not monetized, but now with the capability of these high-frequency processing methods become financially or economically viable. So what we're trying to get at is a world in which the systems are operating with economic coordination that is scoped at the same degree of granularity as the decisions for the system's behavior. That's fundamentally what we're really trying to accomplish. What are these systems doing, and how do we match that with our settlement processes?
That's correct. I mean, most of the clients' discussion with IoT space, the question is coming around if a particular service, very microservice, is performed, and that service has some kind of a worth, and at the moment of delivered, system need to recognize and authorize and account for that value in real time. Correct. That's the kind of implementation which is coming in. The traditional subscription-based billing may not be practical here or may not be effective here. Going to that granular level is really important. And when that comes, how do you think the system is going to manage that kind of a demand? I think this world is going to change to that kind of micro transactional level recognition and settlement.
Yeah, I think that's the nature of the problem, is that we are now looking at these very, very fine-grained behaviors, and they're useful for these larger systems where we're monetizing these kinds of transactions to make use of the coordination layers that we were talking about to ensure that we can capture all of these, and again create that history of who did what, when, and for what purpose.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Ted, for this. Marutha, we are almost on time, so I think we have a few questions, so we could probably move to that. But before that, as a closing note, I think what we spoke about here is extremely relevant, given that more and more systems are becoming autonomous. The level of independence that they have and the granularity of those decisions are like increasing in scope. So it's become quite evident after this discussion that this economic accountability is not something that you can think about later or think about it as a retrofit. It's something that needs to be built into the system. And this financial and architectural decisions have become interwoven. And that's impacting how our perspective at Focaloid as well. Like today, when we think about building any modern system, it is not about just making it autonomous. I think that's the easier part, but it is also about making it accountable to make sure that it is governed. There are boundaries that it adheres to, and to make sure that we are able to track and trace every decision that is happening, so that we can go back and check what's happening under the hood if there is a need to. Right. I think, Marutha, if we have time, we could also jump into maybe pick a few questions. I would hand it over to you now.
Yeah. Thanks, Venkat. And so let me check the questions. So we have a few questions. So the first question is, from a team that just becoming aware of the gap, what is the most useful thing they can do in the next 30 days?
Well, I can answer that if you'd like. I think this is where we introduce the audit into the process. We ask the questions about whether there are verifiable records that will allow us to understand what was authorized by who, under what conditions, what was the pricing. You don't need to attempt all of this from the beginning, but if you have an understanding of who the economic actors are within the systems, that's a good starting point. With that kind of information, you can then improve the way that the systems are essentially being coordinated by this larger process of agentic control.
Okay. I think I completely concur with Ted. I think the first part is all about creating visibility. You need to understand what's currently going on in the system that you have built. What are the actions that have been automated? What are the boundaries? Where do you have approvals in place? And what are you able to see and trace? I think this becomes extremely critical if we want to build further on this or bring accountability into such a system. So that's the place that I would start with.
That's right. I think a cryptographic trace, if you will, in which the delegation of these economic events and the authority that was placed on a device for those actions is logged. And then from that, we can reconstruct entire chains of the decision process, who authorized what, and the important thing is that these are records that are going to be immutable, will be surviving, as I mentioned earlier, the audits or dispute processes. But this becomes a very important piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, I think the next question is almost answered, but still I raise the next question. So with the multi-agent TIC system that we are building, how do you handle accountability with multiple agents and making independent decisions? How do we trace which agent was responsible for a given economic commitment? And I think this is going to be a problem that we're going to explore with an good address. Maybe I would like to hear again, reiterate your views on this.
Absolutely,
right.
Marutha.
So
I think this is. Hey, sorry, Ted. Please go ahead.
Okay, no, I was going to, as you said, reiterate that idea of the cryptographic trace. Each delegation of economic authority from one device to the next it has to be logged. And with that, you can reconstruct the entire decision chain. So I think, I said that earlier. I think that's the right answer in this case. The chain has to be immutable, something that is dependable for reference when failures occur.
Venkat, you want to add to that?
Nothing to add there, Marutha. I think we're on the same page there.
Again, this question is something that we discussed during our discussion, but since it's occurring again, I know it's important. So the question is, we have industrial IoT devices already deployed in the field. We can easily update the firmware. How do you approach the economic accountability for those kind of systems?
I'm sorry, can you restate that question?
So the question is, we have industrial IoT devices already deployed in the field. We can't easily update the firmware. How do we approach economic accountability for those systems?
Yeah, well, again, this is that gateway pattern we discussed. This is establishing proxies that interact with those devices for which firmware upgrades are difficult. And those gateways become the locus of the policies decision-making process.
Yeah. So I think we're coming near to the end. So I would like to now ask Ted and Venkat one question. So Venkat, if team wants to engage Focaloid, and what should be the first conversation like?
I think the first conversation is probably a variant of what Ted framed as the accountability audit. I think for us, it's a discovery. We try to understand what are the autonomous actions that are currently happening, what are the consequences, what visibility do they have into the system, and what are these boundaries. And depending on the outcome of that discovery, depending on the answers that we receive, we then chart a path. We need to decide whether the need is to build an observability layer first. Is the visibility lacking? Do we need to build more visibility? Or is it a governance layer that is missing? Or is it probably changes that needs to be made to the way orchestration today happens within the system? Or it could even be broad integration work, or in a really, really bad scenario, it might require a complete re-architecture or an overhaul of the system. But the first part is always the discovery. That's where probably the best brains come into the conversation and analyze what's at stake.
Yeah, Ted, I would like to direct that question to you also. If somebody has to think about Edge Micropayments or think about EMPIC, how do they approach you, and when do they have to approach you? What's your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, I mean, we welcome discussions with clients to once again, and in a very similar way that Venkat described, to review their operations, understand the economic actions within them, identify opportunities both for improvements or capturing new value, but also to clarify where those boundaries for accountability lie, and ensuring that we can helping them to ensure that they can put into place new processes that provide for clearer accountability and coordination, ultimately improving their bottom line.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ted. And I think we are ahead of time. That's good always. So Venkat and Ted, thank you so much for your insight here. It made my life better. So when I'm going to clients and going to talk about it now, I'm going to talk with a lot more wisdom that you guys have shared to me. And thanks for that. And for the audience, I'm sure that you would have at least one key takeaway from here. We will send you a kind of information package, both about Focaloid and about Edge Micropayments, which you should be able to use it when you need our services. At the same time, if you want to get introduced to Ted or want to have a conversation with Focaloid, please feel free to reach out to us. We are here to support you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Marutha. Thank you, Ted. It was a pleasure being part of this.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Have a good day, everyone.